So look, guys, I've got a bit of a special announcement. I think it's like seriously like really fucking cool, but like I'll talk about that at the end as I normally do. But like just make sure you stay to the end to catch it. Also, this is as part of Warhammer 50k, although I will be continuing with fan fiction of Warhammer 60k. But look, I'll talk about that at the end. Just make sure you catch it, okay? I'll talk to you then.
Section 27 Infamous Persons of the Second Age of Strife. While we talk of the grand dynasties and marauding nations which ruled and suffered together during the period of anarchy and darkness, we must also remember that history is not just the deeds of the many we need concern ourselves in. Each individual experienced this grand horror in a different manner. Some fled to the deepest reaches of their world. Some wallowed in villainy, using the unrelenting misery of the period to justify any horrendous actions employed by the callous, the cruel and the desperate. Some self-harmed, whipping themselves raw in mute horror. Some found solace in debauchery, some in heroic sacrifice. Some felt some kindling embers of hope, deep in their hardened hearts. For isn't the darkness darkest before the dawn? This next section shall cover 5 such figures of importance, and chart their place within the bitter tapestry of this age of doom. 1. Yerick, hero of Hades' hive, butcher of Batek. Commissar Yerick was once the hero of Armageddon, beloved by his men, and almost feared by the orcs he made his enemy. Yet, he chose to abandon the world, in favor of chasing the great war boss Kazkal Maguruk Thraka and his fleet, as it fled the Armageddon system in the latter part of M41. He and a sizable force of guardsmen, along with regiments of PDF Steel Legion, desperate to join their hero in battle once more, joined the large Black Templar fleet of Helbrecht. As he gave chase to the Green Fiend, in the madness and confusion of the period of the New Devourer, worlds were vanquished of life, and chaos became norm. Lost amidst a storm of fleeing pilgrims, Xenos and refugee fleets, as well as the stifling shadow in the warp, the fleet lost their quarry. What was worse, after decades of fruitless, violent searching, the warp grew restless as never before. The Astronomicon was faltering, and bit by bit, piece by piece and ship by ship, their fleet was separated and lost, scattered across the entire segmentum solar and ultima of the Templars. We have already discussed, yet Yerick's fate was to shape him as a figure of fear and loathing, rather than adoration. Tossed upon the torrents of madness for 3 years, eventually Yerick and his small collection of vessels were vomited back into real space, into the Dalinus system. This happened to be the subsector capital of the Mobian subsector. The Mobian subsector, unlike other tracts of Imperial space cut off from the wider whole by treacherous warp currents, did not become a petty imperium in its own right. The subsector governor, Pilates, did not declare himself overlord, or imperator, or anything as pretentious and vain as the other petty emperors. He maintained the title governor, and instead set up his own council, known as the interim body. He and his government considered themselves part of the Imperium, an indivisible structure. When Yerick arrived, Pilatus saw this as validation of his theory that the Imperium had survived, and if he was patient, relief would come. However, the sight that greeted him was somewhat disappointing. 7 battered, battle-damaged troop ships, and an ancient grand cruiser, which listed to one side permanently, its flanks seemingly ravaged by years, nay centuries, of warfare. The naval staff were embittered and tired. Likewise, the guardsmen who came with Yerick were similarly weary. Nevertheless, Pilatus invited them to set up a sector base within his area of space. Yerick readily accepted. His guardsmen and fawning PDF followers set up a large base upon the governor's capital world, known as Batek. Here, he was resupplied, and his troops drilled and trained, until they had regained some of their former elite lethality. Yet, all was not well upon Batek. While Pilatus and his interim body considered everything to be business as usual in the sector, his people did not. Rumors spread of the collapse of the Imperium, of how Batek had not received communication from the Adeptus Terror in countless centuries, and how supplies from neighboring subsectors had not arrived in system in living memory. Food and patience became scarce. The deluded governor continued to send his annual tithes dutifully to Terra. When no word came back, the governor saw nothing wrong, and sent next year's tithe out just the same, fearing possible retaliation should he not do so. This, combined with the lack of imports, began to take its toll upon the heavily populated worlds of the system, most notably, Batek. Upon the planet, mass movements and demonstrations began to spring up across the entire world. Some were movements in favor of the planet being run by committees of civilian. Most simply demanded representation. In their eyes, the Imperium had fallen, and they had no obligation to a dead god. The governor had failed them, and these degenerate equality bands began preaching of the prospect of representative governance of their planet, in the hope that such a government would redistribute resources and relieve the growing economic misery Pilates was inadvertently inflicting upon his own people. These protests were suppressed violently by the mauls and tear gas of the grim-visaged Adeptus Arbites precincts across the world cities of Batek. Yet, their actions merely fueled and fanned the outrage and disgust of the protesters. Pilates requested Yerrik's aid in ending the riots and disruptions. He claimed the equality bands were undermining imperial ideals. Something had to be done. Thus, Yerrik and his soldiers collaborated with the few Arbites forces upon the world, spreading the propaganda message of obedience and submission. Yerrik orated to the crowds. Was he not the hero of Hades' Hive? Beloved by all? However, he was not their hero. Why should they listen to this warmonger? They began to argue, and their protests became more blatant and defiant. Hidden amongst the population, a people's rebellion began to develop. If the governor could not grant them liberty, then he was not their governor, in their view. On the 50th Candlemas of the 200s of M46, over 7 million men, women and children emerged onto the streets of the main city, within sight of the governor's palace. A more blatant provocation could not be made. As the colorful banners and chants filled the vast courtyards before the palace, a great rumble resounded, drowning out the defiant challenges of the populace. The titanic gates to the palace ground opened painfully, and from this grim portal rolled the monstrous form of the Fortress of Arrogance, flanked by 2 whole armored companies. Yerrik, riding atop the tank like some heathen king of old, echoed the blaring roar of the arbitrators across the city, howling through a loud hailer built into his banner blade. Disperse or be destroyed. Then something terrible happened. A single rioter, hidden amongst the bustling mobs of civilians, fired upon the force. It was an ineffectual shot, the single LAS bolt impacting harmlessly into the hull of a lemon Russ. Yerrik, his patience and nerve stretched thin by multiple antagonistic riots, finally snapped. His tanks rumbled forth, pouring death into the packed together crowds. Screams and startled yells rose up from the aghast group. The chilling collective scream soon drowned out by the roar of auto-cannon fire, and the hiss of LAS cannon and multi-lasers. The capital city became filled with confused and terrified crowds of civilians, who fled through the streets, crushing many of themselves amidst the chaos. Thousands more were mown down by the violent volleys of the tanks and accompanying armored fist squadrons, who executed countless protesters with a callous efficiency. Just as the armed forces seemed to have relaxed, that was when the rebels chose to strike. Missile launchers and plasma projectors suddenly began to stream from houses, sewer entrances and various other buildings. Tanks were upturned and damaged, soldiers ambushed, even more civilians caught in the vile crossfire which now developed. The Lemon Russ squadrons patrolled the wider avenues, leveling any building which seemed to harbor fugitives. Hellhounds moved through the smaller streets, their flaming main armament spearing fire directly into enemy-held buildings, roasting all those within with searing promethium. Windows burst with the overpressure, the anguished cries of those within signaling their demise. Yerrik was at the forefront of this massacre. This was a war. He knew how to fight wars. As he howled imperial rhetoric from his lectern aboard the Fortress of Arrogance, the titanic tank ground through the streets. Smaller buildings, and people too old or crippled to evade his vehicle's monstrous tracks, were driven over entirely by the Bane Blade. Its heavy bolters, LAS cannons and demolisher cannon, pulverized anything within range. Men, women, insurgent rebels, buildings, children, all were treated with the same heartless distaste. It was claimed that Yerrik himself took his storm bolter to many of the fleeing combatants, screaming hateful litanies as they were burst asunder by his butcher's tool. Within 6 hours, 3 million civilians and rebels, and 6,000 soldiers, were dead, with over 4 million more unarmed citizens fleeing the city in disarray. Even as the men cheered their victory, Yerrik was perturbed. He knew that it was far from over, even as Yerrik and his fellow commissars held mock trials for the captured rebels before executing them. Word was spreading to every other city across the planet. Native media spread the word. Revolution. The butcher of Batek must be punished. Within scant months, every city across the world was revolting. Though there was no single leadership of the disparate and disorganized revolutionaries, they were united in one thing: utter contempt for the butcher Yerrik, and the Pilates, who they considered to be a puppet of Yerrik, even though this was not strictly true. Arbite precincts were besieged by millions upon millions of vengeful rioters, and the less numerous, but far more deadly, equality bands. who had developed into a semi-professional paramilitary force. Yerik's guardsmen and delusional former Armageddon PDF moved from site to site, battling and destroying whichever foe rose up to engage them. While the Imperial forces were near invincible in open battle with the ragtag paramilitary armors, they could not handle the guerrilla campaign, which was underway across 7 continents. And in conjunction with constant pitched battles and uprisings. Over that decade, Yerik and his men fought near constantly. The rebels, armed with improvised explosives, captured armor and armaments, and fanatical devotion to their cause, took a heavy toll on their oppressors. In some cases, the Batikian PDF battalions found they could no longer murder their own people, and the record of desertion was unbelievably high. Soon, the situation was untenable. Pilatus and his interim body decided to flee the capital world, and found their capital on another of the worlds within the subsector. Yerik cursed them, decrying them as cowards and pacifists. Nevertheless, in 264 M46, the transport bearing the rulers of the Mobian subsector began to rise from the starport. Disgusted and betrayed, the ancient commissar ordered his fortress of arrogance to fire upon the transport. Though the treacherous barrage severely damaged the transport, it managed to escape the world. Yerik, who was by now so very old, even his bionics weren't keeping him flushed with vigor, began to truly go insane. His forces destroyed the starport of Batek, in order to prevent any further cowardly retreat, as he said. 265 M46. The capital was once more besieged by dissidents. However, this time they were well trained, well armed, and hungry for vengeance. All but 3 of Yerik's battalions were destroyed over that year. The Arbites were all dead or in hiding. Most of the native PDF were part of the massive revolt now. Only the palace, besieged on all sides, remained in Yerik's hands. Surrounded by foes, even his fellow allies began to realize Yerik was a failure. Yerik, never known for despair, called for a final, glorious charge. Most of his men refused, but he still managed to persuade his Baneblade crew to join him in this final act. As dusk fell on Yerik's final days, a great roar arose from behind the great gates of the palace. Out surged the Fortress of Arrogance. Its weapons were spent, its fuel low. Nevertheless, it charged, its loud hailers blaring the Emperor's Gloria, well-known imperial battle hymn of the 41st millennium. It plowed through the masses of enemy soldiers, as an evil amount of ordnance and weapons fire impacted the dying Leviathan. Engines ruptured, sponsors toppled off in flames, and the crew died, one by one. Yet still the vehicle plowed forwards, scattering the enemy before it. No one knows who killed Yerik, such was the confusion. All the same, a single LAS bolt struck Yerik in the throat, blasting his head from his shoulders, causing his stiff corpse to pitch itself from the chassis of his battle tank. To be torn apart by the baying hordes of enemies. So romantic revolutionary writers, writing about the glorious revolution after the event, claim the LAS bolt came from the same anonymous shooter in the summer of 250 M46, making up for missing the butcher originally. However, there is no evidence to support this. Thus, in infamy and dishonor, Yerik, hero of Armageddon, and butcher of Batek, met his end. Tuhanerin son, Grand Master of the Order of the Tempestrian League. The Segmentum Tempestus was divided into many different theocracies between 209-999 of M49 and well into M50. The Aphelian Imperium continued to bitterly oppose the Talon Imperium, even after the destruction of Aphelia in M50. As well as this conflict, these two large theocracies fought multiple individual wars with numerous other, far smaller imperiums. Many were merely one of 2 separatist planets banding together, yet several, such as the Balkal Imperium and the Matriarchy of Melador, were powerful and influential petty imperiums in their own right, and engaged in wars with each other, on and off, throughout the period. Yet, these imperiums also had to face countless heretical cult uprisings, piracy and repeated Xenos surges at the same time. So concerned with theological and territorial dominance, these imperiums often found themselves ill at ease to cope. Luckily for them, by chance, a new force was in the process of being created. Honorim's son was a cleric from Damasa, a world on the embattled border between Talon and Aphelian interests. His monastic order, the Divine Sculptorists, were on generally good terms with the two imperiums, and thus were largely left alone. Of course, the rest of the world was Talon dominated, with a large Aphelian population. War was commonplace on the world. While on a justice pilgrimage, it was said a man, armored in perfect grey armor, studded with scripture, appeared before him, guiding him to a data vault. There, he discovered a vault filled with information and documentation written in ancient, pre-Second Strife era Gothic. As a learned scholar, he soon translated all the documents and deciphered the meanings of many of the artifacts. He learned of this ancient order of warriors. They were known as the Frateris Templar. He returned to his order and brought them into knowledge of his discovery. He formed a following. Sung's new movement converted almost all his fellow clerics, and within the year, his beliefs became widespread and popular across the entire world. Patronage by local power magnates and religious backing by both Aphelion and Talon canons, each eager to use the movement's popularity to gain their moral high ground over their theological foes, allowed the order to rapidly expand and develop. Hunarin, though he himself was a skilled warrior and orator due to his role of battle missionary of his order, he knew most of his brothers and sisters of the faith weren't so skilled. Luckily, several prominent sororities patronized his order, and their battle orders soon began to aid in the training and recruitment of his developing force. He eventually allowed the various suits of Frateris Templar armor to be examined by Surf Tech adepts and other mechanics of the Imperial cults of machine, allowing more suits to be built. It took many years, and much blood and money, but eventually, the reborn fraternity was forged. Ships gifted or built for the order, spread throughout the subsector, then segmentum. Using a revolutionary tactic of way station and leapfrogging warp transit, which this chronicler maintains was a tactic stolen from early TAU fleet tactics. Despite the venomous retorts of the many major league masters I have encountered, the order managed, over a decade, to establish order houses across the segmentum, with Grandmaster Hunarin Sung lostly in charge of all of them, from his monastery upon Damaser. His order was tasked by him to defend any emperor-worshipping factions' vessels, as they traveled through the void, defending them from marauding Xenos and any pirates that chose to attack. Similarly, Hunarin, who often sallied forth from his keep upon Damaser, called for his brothers and sisters to cast aside the chains of segregation and division. Division as weakness, a heresy the Imperator Ascendant would never permit. We are children of the Master of Man one and all. Let our tremendous wrath and hatred turn upon those that truly deserve our murderous wrath. Let the adhumanist taint be expunged from our collective realm. Let the heretic and the unclean beast man and children of mutant filth be our foes. Let the anti-human, the cursed Xenos, be our foe. Let hate be directed outwards. Let the outer dwellers fear us, the children of Imperator. Ave Imperator. This Tempestrian League, as it was now called, was readily joined by elder battle sisters and deranged zealots, who dimly recalled the ancient days, where the sororities performed similar roles. Not only this, former mercenaries and converted pirates eagerly joined these various orders of the League. They offered a path to salvation, and many of the superstitious and brutal men knew that this was the only way to both fulfill their violent urges and get into paradise. Many were said to have been merely warmongers and butchers, who merely wanted to kill under the guise of legitimacy, but nevertheless, the ranks of the faithful expanded rapidly. Hunarin's order refused to fight in inter-imperial conflicts, and instead committed itself with butchering worlds of heretics and exterminating Xenos infestations. The Veltan beings, pale and frail witch aliens living on the borders of the segmentum, were utterly killed by the hate-filled League's crusading elements, all in 1 week. With every passing year, and every victory, the Tempestrian League's reputation between the warring theocratic imperiums of Tempestus grew massively. While inter-imperial war could not be stopped, even by the League, the orders were essential. In fact, when Aphilia was utterly destroyed, and its imperium looked as if it would be torn apart by war between the two rival ecclesiarchs elected in the aftermath, and the expansionist Talons, it was the League and the powerful oratory of the now ancient Sung who held together the Broken Realm, and served as neutral arbitrator in the many conclaves and councils that conveyed to decide upon the true ecclesiarch, which was eventually decided to be Ecclesiarch Gregorin II of Tetahim, elected in 005 M50, and prevented the Talons from utterly shattering their ancient foe. 3 days after this election, Hunarin Sung himself died of an infected battle wound. In the 50th millennium, the order was nearly destroyed by a combination of greedy local petty imperiums seizing their assets and the growing menace of the Starfather's Angelic hosts, who becalmed massive areas of the war. Yet, amazingly, they survive until this day, though they are much weakened. Many heroic and influential masters of the order have existed since Hunarin's passing, many of whom deserve their own legends. However, none were as influential or as well loved as their founder, Hunarin Sung the Pious, the man who created the first of the trans post-imperial organizations. Leagues not bound within the social and or geographical framework of a single restrictive petty imperium. Opening picked feed upper hallway 35B. Visual 5 heavily armed men elements of Obervik's combat group. Running towards picked imager. Weapons discharges into dark and far corridor. Blue flashes of luminescence return fire. 3 fall. Splattering biomatter across hall. Strobing or token fire. Audio get the warp in boys, lads. Gushem. Heavy drone of heavy stubber discharge. Frag them. Imperator. Eva Tetranus rushing sound. Query flamer. Unidentified language. Non-human? Visual flashing weapons fire. Lumen globes damaged. Switching to dark sight. Visual humanoid figures. Engaging mercenaries. Single intruder cut down by Autogon exchange. Remaining figures engage. Mercenaries extinguished. Audio unidentifiable scream. Visual humanoids turn device towards picked feed. Query weapon anello. Echoing detonation. Muffled by roof. 3 Belius. The bar ticking. Belius, colloquially known as the Barter King, is an enigmatic figure, famous across much of the Ultima Segmentum, throughout the centuries of the 49th millennium. His world is located on the border between not only the twin juggernauts of the Thexan Trade Empire and the Tau Empire, but also 5 overlapping petty imperial borders. Not to mention the world weave of the Reek. Yet, rather than a subjugated realm, his world known as Free Geld by most scholars of the age was a haven of trade and enterprise, a sort of neutral ground where empires of differing xenos and innumerable free, independent traders could trade technologies, secrets, knowledge and produce, such as the vibrant slave trade functioning throughout the Age of Strife, or the corrosive trade in the narcotic signet, which was gradually, somehow migrating from the Savla realms, many light years from Free Geld. How he survived and indeed, thrived in such a time of misery and monstrosity, is testament to his ruthless intelligence and shrewd cunning. No one knows the origins of Belius. The vast being's visage is hidden behind many veils, and only his closest guardians have seen his true appearance. Some claim he is a rogue Thexan, or possibly an outcast and decadent Eldera mythic race by this point. Others claim darker origins. Records from M42 suggest there was a gene stealer infestation upon the world, due for purging. Since records beyond M42 for the Imperium are simply non-existent, we cannot be sure the infestation was destroyed. It is possible that the departing of the Tyrannid hordes soon after this point could have killed off the infestation. We cannot know. Whatever it was, Belius built up an effective system of catering for the struggling traders and merchants, which plied their trade across Governor Belius' world. Warp travel could only be undertaken via multiple short warp jumps, which made journeys across even sector-sized areas decades-long affairs. Belius provided rest, refuge and refueling for these weary travelers, in exchange for minimal fees, and the chance to cut into these various trades. Uniquely, Belius allowed not only humans of various political affiliations access to his world, but also all many of Xenos and bizarre creatures, defying exact decryptions. All paid the fees, all shared in the trades. Eventually, Belius' world began to be well known as a trading post, and merchants flocked to the world, rather than using it as a stopping off point. Traders, couriers, envoys, usurers and ambassadors began to fill the system near constantly, and Belius became very, very wealthy. Numerous banks and semi-corrupt casinos, many of whom were secretly owned by Belius and his ruling family, who gained even more profits, sprang up to deal with monetary and physical capital. Inevitably, across the crowded and bustling cities across Free Geld, criminals and brigands were drawn to these rich targets, like lice to a canine, fences, pickpockets, thieves, conmen, Natillian soul snatchers and bounty hunters of various genders, creeds and races, flocked to the world to take advantage. Pirates and crime syndicates sought shelter from authorities in the free trading mire of Free Geld, seeking to avoid prosecution or execution, or simply coming to the world to purchase weaponry and supplies, in order to continue their destructive and despicable actions. Prostitutes, actors walked in the darkest alleys, actors and their play companies performed in the streets, or in dedicated playing houses. Assassins left discreet advertisements in ale dens and public conveniences, their adverts making only one stipulation: no hits upon the bar ticking. Gladiatorial pits sprang up, sating the hateful bloodlust which all the cowering masses of the galaxy felt during the age of pitiless misery. The bloody combat of these chrono-constructs gave release to the futile, pent-up rage of the masses, who bayed constantly for blood. though numerous private paramilitary, security groups and bodyguards flogged their services to clients wishing to avoid being dissembled by vagabonds across the world. Belius had two main groups of state-owned forces under his direct control. The first were the Suftum, a group of warrior abhumans, who had a strange desire to perfect their martial abilities using cybernetics and mechanical engineering upon their bodies. Their goat-like physical bodies were enhanced with claws, built-in weapons and digital lasers, and their flesh interwoven with various metal plates, tree-weave flak fibers, and minute force field. These beast men had been shunned by most societies, due to their violence and their strong lusts for both violence and intercourse. Incidentally, on Freegeld, they found plenty of both. They guarded the main holdings of the Barter King, who paid them in slaves and ale, all of which were very abundant in the cities. The other security force was far more secretive. The Hooded Brotherhood of Han was speculated to be made from the deformed relatives of Belius, who formed a secret police force. They would discreetly remove any troublesome guests, without incriminating Belius in the slightest. Freegeld was barbaric, murderous and chaotic in the extreme, yet, somehow, it worked. Of course, as the many divergent empires of the galaxy expanded their ragged borders, there was bound to be trouble. One would have expected the brutish empires to tear Freegeld to pieces, each side fighting over who owned the planet, or destroying any resistance on settling it. However, the Barter King avoided this, in a very simple manner. He joined them all. The TAU entered his system, and demanded he join them. He joined them. The Thexans sent emissaries to his realm, suggesting an alliance. He accepted and thus removed the need for the Thexans to impose their own ruler upon the system and joined the Trade Empire. The Panheritic Imperium entered the system, their dread vessels swarming with stolen Necronaut weaponry. They threatened invasion. Belius sent envoys, saying the king surrendered. The Imperium accepted, and didn't interfere with the world as it provided a lot of income revenue to them. Each time a force came, he became a subject to this force. Handily, while it made him technically subordinate to these empires, it also meant that many of these empires granted him treaties, research grants, and various other funding. He then used these grants and loans to pay his tithes to his other imperial overlords. He played each realm off one another, without them ever realizing. Though it seemed like Freegeld was invincible, it was evidently not the system which held it together, but the influence of the Barter King himself. When he died in his sleep, in 800 M49, his realm collapsed within 7 decades. His tithes became delayed and mismanaged by blundering underlings, and this angered the empires that ruled the realm. Civil wars between rival successors to the throne of Barter King led to his private forces becoming rather more violent and public. In one incident, a merchant was killed in the crossfire, and his White Scars hired goons turned their gleaming bolters and scimitars upon the native forces, causing anarchy and confusion. As thousands of different mercenary groups, bodyguard units, and criminal gangs turned their guns upon their rivals and their apparent foes, each believing their clients and brethren were under threat from a hostile force. The war with no enemies was a baffling and senseless engagement, which cost over 7 million lives in the 2 years it lasted. Afterwards, merchants came less and less frequently to the world, profits dropped, and tithes were not paid. The 17 empires which apparently ruled the system came to collect. Freegeld was destroyed over a period of 2 centuries, as fleet after fleet of militaries came, bombarded, and looted the decaying world. Eventually, with no ruling government, and no laws in particular, the now increasingly barren and sickly world was abandoned by its ruling empires, and it fell into disarray. By M50, it was still a realm of meetings and trading. However, it is almost exclusively criminal in nature, with grimy thugs and robbers roaming the streets murdering and stealing, while large bands of pirates and reavers met to trade stolen goods, and plan further atrocities in other sectors, or simply to get drunk and violent. In 103 M50, by ethereal degree, the 400th phase expansion fleet of Commander Bluehat cracked the planet by directing 700 asteroids into the planet, until it broke up, killing any rogues and crooks stupid enough to still be on the planet when they did so. This was to deter piratical assemblies, and hence keep TAU shipping safe from reavers. So endeth the realm of the Barter King. Yet, while he lived, it was possibly the closest to a functioning society capable during such a turbulent period of genocide, extortion and the death of a god. 4 Festchilal, the Broken. After so much devastation and death across so many millennia, our universe is a realm made hollow and heartless by necessity and misery. Great tracts of space, thousands of light years across, lay barren and destroyed. Wilderness space makes up the vast majority of the realms of the galaxy. The few areas of lucrative or habitable territory fought over, like scraps of fresh meat clinging to the bones of a corpse, being pecked at by ravenous vultures, petty imperiums, alien empires and monolithic societies of abominations, all cluster around these decadent and murderous tracts of ironically named paradise space, for there is nothing but wilderness beyond it and between it. Yet, even the wilderness space is inhabited by countless pirates, mercenaries and obscene monsters. The same cannot be said of ghost space. In some place, where the warp was weak, and the death toll from invasions, the new devourer and the death of stars was 100%, the destroyed and murdered souls are said to cling to existence. Such a being is Festiel. Knowledge of the Festiel, the Broken One, is scant at best. Some call him legend, others myth. Yet, the stories are too many and too similar to discount entirely. On an orphan world, drifting in the deep dark, where no light falls, resides the Festiel. Amidst a world of corpses, where the entire world was dead and rotten to ash, the Festiel roam. Some say he is a corrupted Night Lord, driven into insanity and bitterness by despairing lunacy. Others claim the fiend is a fury, tossed from the realm of the warp during the conflagration with the Starfather, to be trapped within the material realm, taking the body of a fallen man, filling him with bitterness and rendering the man incorporeal. The stories are countless, and futile. He simply is. It is said the realm is utterly silent. Unnaturally so, as if the planet is cursed with silence. Creeping things, with their orifices sewn shut, and their flesh wasted and thinned until their dry bones can be seen, crawl and scrape silently. Furies flutter from crumbling towers, snarling soundlessly in futile dislocation. The rogue planet appears in the void, when vessels are forced to drop out of the warp, short of their destinations. As they ready themselves for another jump, the dark planetoid appears, a black shape against a black void. The vessels inexplicably break down, their engines bafflingly non-functional. Despite the best efforts of captured tech priests or surf demiurge engineers aboard, they simply stop. Then the silence comes. The whole vessel becomes silent. Panic ensues, as men desperately scream to be heard, clawing at their heads and ears furiously. Before long, the beleaguered crews either enter the orbit of the void world, or are ensnared. The accounts differ. Desperate for a solution, they send shuttles to the surface. No one returns. Soon, the vessels begin to orbit closer and closer. In most accounts, the planet crashes, yet somehow they survive. They are dragged before the Silent One, his mouth like a rotting cavern. Festiel screams in their faces, no noise erupting from his lips. He rips apart most of the men with his claws. In frustration, the survivors, those to relate the tales, claim they were spared for a purpose. Festiel wants to be heard, wants to be known. Though undoubtedly horrific to hear, these stories are nothing compared to simple existence in this accursed universe. And so, no. Author tears autoquill link from forehead, begins scribbling across data slate, for direct log interface. Interfacing. As I write this, I am disgusted. I cannot be dispassionate any longer. I sit in the darkness of these vaults, cowering from the reavers above, who even now slaughter our defenders to a man above us, and I talk about legends and ghost stories, as if they matter. I contemplated destroying this log, just to stop them from corrupting it or defiling it. Then I realized, this log is more important than this whole facility. This log is evidence. It is proof. Throughout the millennia of my existence, not once have I found another history of this age. Nothing so complete. PIC display shakes, as detonations from above become audible above a rumble. Voices beyond room begin to scream. Gunfire beyond chamber door. I would not be so arrogant as to say this history is anywhere near a complete log of this period of abomination. I cannot depict everything, for I am only human but to laugh. But I am the only one left, the only one who has a continuity of vision. I was there before, during and after. The human race needs to know what it once was and what it can be again. This order, the Order of the Recollectors, brought me here to collate a summary of the universe from the billions of source material they have hoarded in these vaults over the millennia of degeneration. To store here is a permanent record of all the gods to see. I have done as you asked, but I must break our contract. Metallic bangs begin to resound behind the author. Massive battering ram humanoid foes attempting to breach the vaults. Author ignores. I built a device. This world was naturally linked to the web. Perhaps this is how the Recollectors first got here? It doesn't matter. There was a gate. I studied it. I took it apart and rebuilt it. It took me centuries, but I did it. Originally, I tailored the gate as a getaway system for myself, but I know now that it is this log, this record, which needs to survive this. I can't let my legacy be destroyed. I have already lived too long, done too much evil. Sounds of gunfire. I suppose then this should be my last declaration first, to organize. User 17382 request equals file data summary. Process? Yes. Files located 1003 sections. Begin packaging sequence? Number. Please state desired functions. Use the initial 27 as the hash index for the package sort. Use the rest for interspersed obfuscation code using quantum algorithm delta 5. Collate, then package. Collation complete. Awaiting instruction beta 6. I am an evil man. Perhaps never intended. No, never intended. This changes nothing though. My actions may very well have doomed us all. I tried to stop them. I tried with all my cunning, my might and my intellect. There was nothing I could do. Everything I did just made things worse. Hopefully, this log can be of some use to those that go on after I am dead and I will die. There's no doubt about this now. Alongside this log, I have attached all the weapon, vessel, and technological blueprints I could lay my hands upon from the Recollections librarians. I hope they are of some use to those I am sending this to. Encrypted section. I send this to Armageddon, the planet of battles. I know what happened there, and I know who leads the Imperium growing there. If you are indeed reading this hermit, I know your name, and I have one thing to say to you. Save us. Please save us Primarch. Save us Vulcan. Encrypted section. So, I commend my soul to laugh softly. I almost said God Emperor then. He's not worship of that title. Not now. I commend my soul to the Imperium. May it rise again. Forgive me. Regards. Lord Inquisitor Crickman. Author concludes log. Log locked and secured. Stasis field engaging in 10 seconds. 10 seconds. Humanoid figure bursts into room. Author turns to them. Obscures image of figure. 9 seconds. Author too late. Your realm will fall. 8 seconds. Humanoid the templates. Where are they? 7 seconds. 6 seconds. Author spits at silhouetted figure. Gunshots. Viscera obscures picked lens. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. Figure advances. Author falls. Figure strikes data slots from desk. Spectrum etching initiated via proximity trigger. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. Figure focuses upon log device. Lunges for log device. Spectrum match found. Figure equals subject 2352. Codename designation bio. 1 second. Stasis engaged. Colors. Swelling and blistering and monstrous. The cogitator brain cannot identify the realm it slides, like a bullet through the concept of envy. Oily shapes, milky white eyes in the side of twisting, snarling figures. Vague structure, shifting along smooth walls. More colors splash into view. Waves at a beach. Cross-referencing fails, as the images before the cogitator unit shift constantly. The temperature fluctuated and flexed, forming ribbons around the capsule, as it flew through the frictionless realm. Hot, cold, hot, all formed spider-like structures on its flank, before they dissolved in logic. Eventually, perhaps before it set off, the capsule finally stopped, with a hiss and a gargle. Opening picked feed. 2 figures, located in room. Room analogous to bunker system. Figure 1 taps controls outside of log device. Figure 2 remains motionless, transfixed by device. Spectrum etching indicates humans. Human 1 continues adjustments. Human 2, are you supposed to do that? It's techno magic. We should burn it. Human 1, no. He said we weren't to burn techno horrors anymore. We bring it to him when we find them. He'll know what to do. Further adjustments. Stasis field deactivated. Human 2 recoils from deactivation sequence. Human 2 devil. Human 1 nap. Nothing heathen about it. Go. Go get the hermit. Go. Go tell him. Or one of the angel fire warriors. Go. Human 2 departs. Human 1 smiles a device. Log ends.
So look, let's talk about 50k first. I have to give serious credit to Lord Lookin. I think, honestly, as far as 40k fanfiction goes, outstanding. And it's what I like about it is his one is very serious, this one, which normally I like to focus on the silly stuff, but like I think he did an outstanding job. and thankful for his story. And almost, I do feel like it feels like that with, okay, because it's a bit outdated, and with 40k lore has moved forward since this was all written, there is a lot of similarities, like, with the birth of that Tau god of sorts, and the new Primarch leading humanity. Instead of Cadia, it's Terror. Like, for fanfiction, he's not far off. Like, he's definitely tapping into the right aspects or avenues. Would that be? Am I saying that right? I don't know. But look, I think his stuff's outstanding, and look, I hope you guys really enjoyed the 50k stuff. I don't even know where to start, like, because it's just so big and encompassing, and he really did cover as much as he could. But like, all I'm going to say is we're going to be starting 60k very soon, and I know you guys are going to love it, so we'll just get there. But look, onwards and upwards, as I like to say. Otherwise, I don't want to keep you here all day. You've sat through a long enough video, and I don't really like to push them too long. We're all busy people after all. But no, look. So for me with YouTube, I don't really feel like a creator at all. I'm more of a curator. I would describe myself as, like, okay, I'm sure you've all came into this problem before, of you sit down and you read something on the internet, like, be it a short story or even quite a long one, and you think it's fucking great, it's outstanding. So what you do is you send it to your mate. It's like, yo mate, you need to sit down, give this a read, trust me, it's worth it, you'll enjoy it, give it a go, you never know, you might just like it. And then they just never read it, So what I feel like, what I do is I feel like I convert it into, like, a more digestible format that helps get the word out there. Like, I'm a fan. Like, I'm a massive fan of Word Looking, and I'm a massive fan of Soggy, and I'm a massive fan of Felix. The Felix is a guy that does a lot of the D&D stories that I like to do. I think his stuff's outstanding. I think it's all golden. Anything he touches is gold. And look, that's what I feel like. I'm a fan, and I feel very similar to you guys, because, like, I think this is why my channel has done so well. Like, like you never expect to get that far with just using text to speech, and stories that you find, like, on the internet that you like. For me, I find them interesting. I think they're really cool, and I love doing this. And I think, like, I've developed a really good audience because of that. I've developed an audience that is just like me in a way, they're the same people, and they're interested in the same things, and I don't know, I feel very, well, I don't know what the right word is, but like, thanks for enjoying it, because I enjoy it, but look, enough. Look, see, I told you I go off on tangents, but look, we'll just keep going. As I say, I like to put it into digestible chunks and stuff like that, and I'm a massive, like, I'm an avid internet user, I've been fucking about on the internet since the late 90s, early 2000s, and the internet's just not what it used to be. It's getting bigger, so it is. The normies are coming on, which isn't always good, and we're getting a lot of laws and stuff imposed by bodies like the FCC or the EU with Article 13 and all that jazz. So I'm very happy to announce that I've been made an affiliate of NordVPN. I think it's really fucking cool. I've personally been using their service for a while now. I used to be on Proton VPN and ExpressVPN, but I like Nord, so I do. And also a lot of the people that I also watch on the internet are affiliates of NordVPN, so, like, it helps support them in a weird way, and it gives you a service. So, like, I'm very happy to be made one. And if it's something that you've been looking into, if you've been thinking about getting a VPN, or maybe you want to swap, check them out. Honestly, they're doing a really good deal at the time of recording this, 75% off, which is stupid, that's big. And for me, I wouldn't be one for getting sponsors. Like, I don't feel very comfortable a lot of the time. Like, look at that BetterHelp scandal. Like, that's just a prime example of why I just wouldn't want to do sponsors a lot of the time. But for me, I think VPNs I'm more than okay with, and, like, maybe third-party bit seller websites for tabletop, bits and accessories. I think they're really cool. I use a lot of that stuff myself, so they would be people that I would be comfortable working with. So look, I just think it's really cool. I've actually been sponsored, and, like, if it helps me out, it helps you guys out. It's something to really check out. And look, I'm sorry for rambling. I really enjoyed the 50k stuff. 60k is coming soon. check out links down below. Check out the link. Oh, sorry, I'm not good at all this, but like, so NordVPN, links down below. Use coupon code Neckbeardia and like see what you get. I hope you guys. It's a service that will use as much as I use, you know, and you can never be. It's never a bad idea to protect your data, you know. It's kind of like, you know, the internet's like a bit of a dirty bitch, and sometimes you just need to use a condom, you know, and think of NordVPN as that ultimate protection tool, you know, because you don't want to be riddled with whatever, you know. So, like, I've gambled enough, and I'm not very good at all this type of stuff. So, like, I'll talk to you guys soon. Hope you enjoyed, and hey, I got a sponsor. I feel like, you know, hey, getting up in the world, you know what I mean? That's really cool. And, look, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
If you haven't already, check out my Redbubble portfolio. You might just find something you like.
Just stop it! Stop! No! Just stop it! It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more! Where the fuck are your parents? Who are your parents? I'm gonna call Child Protective Services. It's time to stop!